The wind cut through the streets of Greenwich, Connecticut like a blade that December evening. Snow had begun to fall in thick, silent waves, blanketing the manicured lawns of the wealthiest neighborhood in the state. Behind towering iron gates and perfectly trimmed hedges, mansions glowed with warm light, their windows revealing chandeliers, grand staircases, and lives most people would never touch. Clara Bennett moved quickly along the service path behind the Ashford estate, her thin coat doing little against the cold. Her breath came out in small clouds as she hugged herself, walking the familiar route from the main house to the old servants' quarters at the edge of the property. She was 26 years old, though exhaustion made her look older. Her dark hair was pulled back in a simple bun, and her hands were raw from hours of scrubbing floors, polishing silverware, and wiping down surfaces that gleamed but were never quite perfect enough. She had worked at the Ashford mansion for 8 months now. It wasn't the life she had imagined for herself, but it was steady work, and in a world that had given her very little, steady was enough. The job came with a small room in the storage building behind the estate, just large enough for a bed, a table, and a hot plate. It wasn't much, but it was hers. And after years of sleeping in shelters and couches borrowed from strangers, having a door that locked felt like luxury. Clara reached the side entrance to the mansion and paused, glancing back toward the main gate. The street beyond was empty, silent except for the soft hiss of snow hitting pavement. She should go inside. It was late, and Mrs. Cordelia Ashford, the head housekeeper, had made it very clear that staff were expected to be invisible after 8 p.m. But something made her hesitate. A sound, faint, almost swallowed by the wind. A child's voice. Clara turned slowly, squinting through the snowfall. At first, she saw nothing. Then near the base of the stone wall that surrounded the estate, she saw movement. 2 figures huddled together beneath a bare oak tree, just outside the gate. One was small, a child, wrapped in what looked like a torn blanket. The other was a man, his shoulders hunched, his face buried in his hands. Clara's heart clenched. She knew she should walk away. The Ashford estate had strict rules: no visitors, no guests, no exceptions. Bringing strangers onto the property was grounds for immediate termination, and she couldn't afford to lose this job. But the child's quiet sobbing drifted through the air, and Clara felt something break inside her chest. She walked toward the gate. "Hello?" she called softly. The man's head snapped up. He was in his mid-30s, his face hollow with exhaustion, his clothes torn and dirty. His eyes were red, and when he saw Clara, he scrambled to his feet, pulling the child closer to him. "I'm sorry," he said quickly, his voice hoarse. "We didn't mean to bother anyone. We'll leave." "Wait," Clara said, raising her hand. She glanced back at the mansion, then stepped closer to the gate. Are you okay?" The man's face crumpled. He looked down at the boy in his arms, a child no older than 6 with pale skin and wide, frightened eyes. The boy wasn't crying anymore, but his body was shaking violently. "We're fine," the man said, though his voice cracked. We're just trying to find somewhere warm. But everywhere we go, they tell us to leave." Clara's throat tightened. She had heard that tone before. It was the sound of someone who had run out of options. "How long have you been out here?" she asked quietly. 3 days, the man whispered. "We've been sleeping in doorways, under bridges, anywhere we can. I lost my job 2 months ago. Lost our apartment. I tried everything. Shelters, churches, friends. But there's no room. Everyone says no." The boy whimpered softly, and Clara saw his lips were blue. She should walk away. She should go inside, lock the door, and pretend she never saw them. But when she looked at the child's face, all she could see was herself at that age, cold and alone, waiting for someone to care. "Come with me," Clara said suddenly. The man blinked. "What?" "Come with me," she repeated, her voice firmer now. "I can't let you stay out here. We can't—" "You'll freeze," Clara interrupted. "Your son will freeze. Please, just for tonight." The man stared at her, his eyes filling with tears. "You'd do that? For us?" Clara nodded. "Follow me, and stay quiet." She led them along the side of the estate, moving carefully through the shadows. Her heart was pounding so hard she thought it might burst. If anyone saw her, if Mrs. Cordelia found out, if Mr. Ashford discovered strangers on his property, she would be fired on the spot. But she couldn't stop. She wouldn't. They reached the old storage building at the back of the property. It was a forgotten place filled with dusty furniture, broken equipment, and boxes no one had opened in years. Clara unlocked the side door and ushered them inside. "Wait here," she whispered. "I'll be right back." She ran to her small room and grabbed the only blankets she had, along with the loaf of bread and jar of peanut butter she'd been saving for the rest of the week. When she returned, the man was sitting on the floor, holding his son close, rocking him gently. Clara knelt beside them and handed over the blankets. "Wrap him up, he needs to get warm." The man took the blankets with trembling hands. "Thank you," he whispered. "Thank you so much." Clara made a simple sandwich and handed it to the boy. He took it with both hands and ate slowly, his eyes never leaving hers. "What's your name?" Clara asked softly. "Tommy," the boy whispered. "I'm Clara," she said, smiling gently. "You're safe now, Tommy. I promise." The father looked at her, his face filled with disbelief and gratitude. "I don't know how to repay you." "You don't have to," Clara said quietly. "Just rest, both of you." She stayed with them for an hour, making sure Tommy was warm and fed. When the boy finally fell asleep curled up against his father's chest, Clara stood to leave. "I'll check on you in the morning," she whispered. "Don't make any noise, okay?" The man nodded, his eyes glistening. "Thank you. You're an angel." Clara shook her head. "I'm just someone who understands." She slipped out of the storage building and returned to her room, her heart still racing. She had broken the rules. She had risked everything. But as she lay down on her small bed, staring at the ceiling, she felt something she hadn't felt in a long time. Peace. What Clara didn't know was that someone had been watching. From the third-floor window of the mansion, a man stood in the shadows, his arms crossed, his expression unreadable. Nathaniel Ashford, the billionaire CEO who owned the estate, had returned home late that evening and happened to glance outside, just as Clara led the strangers across the property. He should have been angry. He should have called security, but instead he found himself unable to look away, and tomorrow morning, everything would change. Nathaniel Ashford didn't sleep that night. He stood by the window of his study, a glass of whiskey untouched in his hand, watching the snow fall over the grounds of his estate. The scene he had witnessed hours earlier played over and over in his mind like a film he couldn't pause. The maid, Clara, leading two strangers across his property, the way she had moved carefully, protectively, glancing over her shoulder as if the world itself might punish her for one act of kindness. He had built an empire on calculated decisions, on reading people, on knowing when someone was lying or hiding something. But what he saw in Clara's face wasn't deception. It was something he hadn't seen in years, something that felt almost foreign to him now. Compassion. Nathaniel was 38 years old, and he had spent the last 15 years of his life building Ashford Industries into one of the most powerful investment firms on the East Coast. He had money, influence, and respect. He had everything a man could want. And yet, standing in that window watching a woman risk everything for two people she didn't even know, he felt something crack deep inside his chest. He had forgotten what it looked like when someone cared about something other than themselves. At 6 in the morning, Nathaniel dressed in a dark suit and walked down the grand staircase of the mansion. The house was still quiet. The other staff members wouldn't arrive for another hour. He moved through the hallways with purpose, his footsteps echoing against the marble floors until he reached the back door that led to the service area. The storage building was just ahead, half hidden by overgrown hedges and old oak trees. Nathaniel had barely set foot in that part of the estate in years. It was where forgotten things went to gather dust, where broken furniture and outdated equipment sat waiting to be thrown away or forgotten entirely. But this morning, it held something else. He pushed open the door slowly, careful not to make a sound. The air inside was cold and musty, filled with the smell of old wood and damp stone. He walked deeper into the building, past stacks of chairs and rolled-up carpets, until he reached a small, cleared space near the back. And there, on the floor, he saw them. Clara was asleep, curled up on the cold concrete, her thin jacket draped over her like a blanket. In her arms, she held a small boy, his head resting against her shoulder, his face peaceful for the first time in days. A few feet away, a man sat with his back against the wall, his eyes closed, his breathing slow and steady. Nathaniel stopped in his tracks. He had expected to feel anger. He had expected to feel violated, betrayed even, that someone had broken the rules of his home. But instead, all he felt was a deep, aching sadness. This woman, who had so little, had given everything she had. She had sacrificed her own warmth, her own safety, her own future, for two strangers who had nowhere else to go. And she had done it without hesitation. Nathaniel stood there for a long time, just watching the rise and fall of the boy's chest, watching the man's face lined with exhaustion and worry. watching Clara, who even in sleep looked tired, her hands still wrapped protectively around the child. He didn't know how long he stood there, but eventually the man stirred. His eyes opened slowly, and when he saw Nathaniel standing in the doorway, his entire body went rigid. "Please," the man whispered, his voice shaking. "Please don't call the police. I'll leave right now. Just, please don't hurt my son." Nathaniel raised a hand. "I'm not calling anyone," he said quietly. The man blinked, confusion and fear warring on his face. You're not?" "No," Nathaniel said. He stepped closer, his eyes moving to Clara and the boy. "Tell me what happened." The man hesitated, then slowly, carefully he began to speak. His name was David Miller. He had worked as a mechanic in Bridgeport for 12 years, supporting his wife and son. But 2 years ago, his wife had been diagnosed with cancer. They had spent everything they had on treatment, sold their car, their furniture, everything. She fought for 18 months, and then she died. David's voice cracked as he spoke, and Nathaniel listened in silence. "After she passed, I couldn't keep up," David continued. "The medical bills, the rent, everything. I tried to work more hours, but the shop closed down. I lost my job. I lost our apartment. And then it was just me and Tommy, and I didn't know what to do." "How long have you been on the streets?" Nathaniel asked. 3 months, David whispered. "We've been staying in shelters when we can, but they're always full. Last week they told us there was no more room, so we've been sleeping outside, and it's been so cold. Tommy's been getting sick, and I didn't know where else to go." Nathaniel's jaw tightened. He had read about homelessness in the newspapers, had seen the statistics and reports, had even donated to charities that claimed to help, but he had never looked it in the face. He had never seen what desperation actually looked like. "And then she found us," David said, his eyes moving to Clara. "Your maid. She didn't have to help us. She didn't even know us. But she did. She gave us everything she had, food, blankets, a place to sleep. She saved my son's life." Nathaniel looked down at Clara, still asleep, still holding the boy. He thought about the life she must have lived to understand what it meant to have nothing. He thought about the risks she had taken, the consequences she would face if anyone found out, and he made a decision. "Wake her," Nathaniel said softly. David hesitated, then gently touched Clara's shoulder. "Miss Clara," he whispered. "Miss Clara, wake up." Clara stirred, her eyes fluttering open. For a moment she looked confused, disoriented. Then she saw Nathaniel standing in front of her, and her entire body went cold. She scrambled to her feet, nearly dropping the boy in the process. "Mr. Ashford," she stammered, her voice shaking. I can explain. You broke the rules," Nathaniel said calmly. Clara's face went pale. "I know. I'm sorry. I'll leave right now. Just, please don't punish them. They didn't do anything wrong." "I'm not punishing anyone," Nathaniel said. Clara blinked. "What?" Nathaniel looked at David, then at the boy, who was now awake and clinging to his father's arm. Then he looked back at Clara. "Come with me," he said. "All of you." "Where?" Clara asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "To the house," Nathaniel said. "You need food. The boy needs medical attention, and we need to talk." David shook his head. "Sir, we can't." "You can," Nathaniel interrupted. "And you will." He turned and walked toward the door, leaving no room for argument. After a moment of stunned silence, Clara picked up the boy and followed, David close behind her. They walked across the estate in silence, the morning sun just beginning to rise over the horizon. When they reached the back entrance of the mansion, Nathaniel led them inside through the service hallway and into the kitchen. It was a massive room, filled with stainless steel appliances, marble countertops, and enough space to prepare meals for 50 people. Nathaniel gestured to the table in the corner. "Sit," he said. Clara and David sat down slowly, the boy still in Clara's arms. Nathaniel moved to the refrigerator and began pulling out food. Eggs, bread, butter, fruit, juice. He worked quickly, efficiently, as if he had done this 1,000 times before. Clara watched him in disbelief. "Mr. Ashford, you don't have to eat," Nathaniel said, placing a plate in front of her. "All of you." David stared at the food as if it might disappear. Then, slowly, he reached for a piece of bread and handed it to Tommy. The boy ate carefully, his eyes wide and watchful. Nathaniel sat down across from them, his expression unreadable. "Clara," he said quietly, "why did you do it?" Clara looked down at her hands. "Because no one helped me when I needed it," she said softly. and I didn't want them to feel the way I did. Nathaniel was silent for a long moment. Then he stood and walked to the window, staring out at the estate. "David," he said, "what kind of work did you do?" "Mechanic," David said. "I can fix anything. Cars, machinery, equipment. I'm good with my hands." Nathaniel nodded slowly. "And you, Clara? How long have you worked here?" 8 months, Clara said. "And before that?" I moved around a lot," Clara said carefully. "Foster care mostly, and then just survival." Nathaniel turned to face them, his expression serious. "I'm going to make you both an offer," he said. "David, I own several properties that need maintenance. I'll give you a job, a salary, and a place to live, you and your son." David's eyes filled with tears. "Sir, I don't know what to say." "Say yes," Nathaniel said. Then he looked at Clara. "And you? I want you to stay." Clara's breath caught. "Stay? Not as a maid," Nathaniel said quietly. "As something more." And in that moment, everything changed. Clara stared at Nathaniel Ashford as if he had just spoken in a language she didn't understand. The kitchen, with its gleaming surfaces and soft morning light filtering through the windows, felt suddenly too bright, too surreal. She must have misheard him. There was no other explanation. "I'm sorry," she said slowly, her voice barely steady. "What did you just say?" Nathaniel remained by the window, his hands clasped behind his back, his posture straight and controlled. But there was something different in his eyes now, something softer than the cold businessman she had glimpsed in passing over the past 8 months. "I said I want you to stay," he repeated. "Not as my employee, as something more." David Miller looked between them, confusion written across his tired face. Tommy had stopped eating and was watching the adults with the silent intensity that children develop when they sense something important is happening. Clara felt her heart hammering against her ribs. "Mr. Ashford, I don't understand what you mean." Nathaniel turned to face her fully. "I've been watching you since you started working here, Clara. Not in the way you might think. I've watched how you work, how you treat the other staff members, how you move through this house as if you're trying not to disturb the air itself." Clara's cheeks flushed. She had always tried to be invisible, believing that invisibility was safety. "Last night," Nathaniel continued, "I saw you risk everything you have for 2 people you'd never met. You gave them your food, your blankets, your warmth. You slept on a concrete floor to make sure a child wouldn't freeze. And you did it knowing that if you were caught, you'd lose everything." "I couldn't just leave them outside," Clara whispered. "Most people would have," Nathaniel said. "Most people would have walked past, would have convinced themselves it wasn't their problem, would have protected their own interests first." He paused. "I would have. 6 months ago, a year ago, I would have walked right past them without a second thought." The admission hung in the air like something fragile. "But watching you," Nathaniel said, "made me realize something. I've spent 15 years building wealth, accumulating success, surrounding myself with people who want something from me. And in all that time, I've never met anyone who gave without expecting anything in return." Clara didn't know what to say. She glanced at David, who looked equally bewildered, then back at Nathaniel. "I still don't understand what you're asking," she said carefully. Nathaniel walked to the table and sat down across from her. Up close, she could see the fine lines around his eyes, the slight shadow of exhaustion beneath them. He looked like a man who hadn't truly rested in years. "I'm 38 years old," he said quietly. "I've had relationships, engagements, connections, but they were always transactional. People wanted access to my money, my influence, my world. No one ever saw me, just what I could provide." Clara's throat tightened. She understood that feeling more than he could possibly know. "What I'm asking," Nathaniel said, meeting her eyes, "is if you would consider staying here, not in the servants' quarters, not as an employee, but as someone who belongs in this house, as someone who could help me remember what it means to be human." "You're talking about marriage," Clara said, the word barely a whisper. "Eventually, yes," Nathaniel said, "but not immediately. I'm not proposing out of impulse or pity. I'm asking if you'd be willing to get to know me, to let me get to know you, to see if what I felt watching you last night could become something real." David cleared his throat softly. "Sir, I think maybe Clara and I should talk privately." "No," Clara said, surprising herself. She looked at Nathaniel. "You don't know me. You don't know where I came from or what I've been through. You've seen one act of kindness, but that doesn't mean—" "Tell me then," Nathaniel interrupted gently. "Tell me who you are." Clara felt something crack open inside her chest. She had spent so many years keeping her story locked away, convinced that speaking it aloud would somehow make it more real, more painful. "I grew up in foster care," she said, her voice shaking. "My mother left me at a fire station when I was 3 days old. I went through 7 different homes before I aged out at 18. Some were okay, most weren't. I learned early that if you make yourself small enough, quiet enough, maybe people won't hurt you." Nathaniel listened without interrupting, his expression never changing. "When I turned 18, I was on my own," Clara continued. "No family, no support, no safety net. I worked whatever jobs I could find. Waitress, housekeeper, retail. I slept in my car for 6 months until it broke down and I couldn't afford to fix it. Then I slept in shelters, then on the street." Tommy had moved closer to Clara as if sensing her pain. She put her hand gently on his head. "I understand what it's like to be invisible," Clara said. "To have people look right through you as if you don't exist. To be so cold you can't feel your fingers. To be so hungry you'd eat food out of a dumpster and be grateful for it." She looked up at Nathaniel. "That's who I am. I'm not sophisticated. I don't know how to exist in your world. I'm just someone who survived. And that," Nathaniel said softly, "is exactly why I'm asking." Clara blinked, confused. "You survived," Nathaniel said. "Despite everything, you survived. And more than that, you kept your humanity. You didn't become bitter or cruel. You didn't close yourself off from other people's suffering. You saw someone in pain and you helped them, even when it cost you everything." He leaned forward slightly. "Clara, I don't need someone sophisticated. I don't need someone who knows which fork to use at a dinner party or how to make small talk with investors. I need someone real, someone who can teach me how to feel again." The kitchen had fallen completely silent. Even Tommy had stopped moving, sensing the weight of the moment. "I know this is unconventional," Nathaniel continued. "I know it sounds crazy, but I'm asking you to consider it. Stay here, not in the servants' quarters, but in the guest wing. Take time to rest, to recover, to figure out what you want. And if, after a few months, you decide this isn't right for you, I'll help you find a place of your own, a real home, with no strings attached. And if I stay?" Clara asked, her voice barely audible. "Then we'll see where this goes," Nathaniel said. "One day at a time." Clara looked at David, who gave her a small, encouraging nod. Then she looked down at Tommy, who was staring up at her with those wide, trusting eyes. She thought about the storage room where she had slept on the concrete floor. She thought about the years of moving from place to place, never belonging anywhere, always waiting for the other shoe to drop. She thought about what it would mean to have stability, security, a chance at something more. But more than anything, she thought about the look in Nathaniel's eyes. It wasn't pity. It wasn't charity. It was something else. Something that looked almost like hope. "Okay," she said finally. "I'll stay. For now." Nathaniel's expression softened with something that might have been relief. "Thank you," he said quietly. He stood and turned to David. "I meant what I said. I'll have my property manager contact you this afternoon about the position. You and Tommy will have an apartment in one of my buildings in Stamford, fully furnished, rent-free. Tommy can enroll in the local school. You'll start work next week." David's hands were shaking as he reached across the table to shake Nathaniel's hand. "I don't know how to thank you, sir. You've given us our lives back." "Thank Clara," Nathaniel said. "She's the one who saved you." Over the next few hours, the mansion came alive with activity. Nathaniel made phone calls, arranged transportation, spoke to his staff. Mrs. Cordelia, the head housekeeper, appeared in the kitchen doorway at one point, her expression shocked when she saw Clara sitting at the table eating breakfast. "Mr. Ashford, what is the meaning of—" "Clara will be moving to the guest wing," Nathaniel said calmly. "Please prepare the blue room for her, and arrange for a doctor to examine the boy." Mrs. Cordelia's mouth opened and closed like a fish. "Sir, I don't understand." "You don't need to," Nathaniel said, his tone brooking no argument. "Just do as I ask." By noon, David and Tommy had been driven to their new apartment in Stamford. Tommy had hugged Clara so tightly before leaving that she thought her heart might break. David had tears streaming down his face as he thanked her one last time. "You're an angel," he whispered. "I'll never forget what you did for us." And then they were gone, and Clara was standing in the grand foyer of the Ashford mansion, feeling more lost than she had in years. Nathaniel appeared at her side. "Let me show you to your room," he said gently. He led her up the grand staircase, down a hallway lined with oil paintings and antique furniture, and stopped at a door painted soft blue. "This is yours." he said, opening the door. Clara stepped inside and felt her breath catch. The room was 3 times the size of her entire servants' quarters. A massive 4-poster bed sat against one wall, covered in white linens. Large windows overlooked the estate grounds. There was a sitting area, a desk, and a door that led to a private bathroom with a clawfoot tub. "I can't stay here," Clara whispered. "This is too much." "It's exactly enough," Nathaniel said. "Rest. Settle in. And when you're ready, we'll talk more." He turned to leave, but Clara's voice stopped him. "Why are you really doing this?" she asked. Nathaniel paused in the doorway, his back to her. "Because for the first time in 15 years, he said quietly, "I met someone who made me want to be a better man." And then he was gone, leaving Clara alone in a room that felt like a dream. Outside, snow had begun to fall again, soft and silent. And somewhere in the house, everything was about to change in ways none of them could predict. The first week passed like a fever dream. Clara woke up each morning in the blue room, disoriented by the softness of the sheets, the warmth of the radiator, the way sunlight poured through windows that overlooked gardens she had only ever seen from a distance. She would lie there for several minutes waiting for someone to burst through the door and tell her it had all been a mistake, that she needed to return to her small room behind the estate. That kindness like this didn't exist in the real world. But no one came. Instead, each morning brought small, unexpected gifts. Fresh clothes appeared in the wardrobe, perfectly sized for her. Meals were brought to her room on silver trays, far more food than she could possibly eat. A housekeeper named Maria, who had always been kind to Clara during her time as staff, now knocked gently before entering, treating her with a deference that made Clara deeply uncomfortable. "Please," Clara said on the 3rd morning when Maria arrived with breakfast. "You don't have to do this, I can get my own food." Maria smiled, her round face crinkling with warmth. "Mr. Ashford's orders, miss. You're to be treated as a guest of the house." "But I'm not a guest," Clara protested. "I worked here, I don't know what I am." Maria set the tray down on the small table by the window. "You're someone who did a good thing," she said simply. "And now good things are happening to you. Maybe just accept it." After Maria left, Clara sat by the window and watched the estate come to life. Gardeners trimmed hedges despite the cold. Delivery trucks brought packages to the service entrance. And somewhere in this massive house, Nathaniel Ashford was conducting business, making decisions that affected thousands of people, living a life that seemed impossibly distant from hers. She hadn't seen him since that first day. Not at breakfast, not in the hallways, not anywhere. She wondered if he was avoiding her, if he had already regretted his impulsive offer. Part of her hoped he was. It would make leaving easier. On the 4th day, there was a knock at her door in the late afternoon. Clara opened it to find not Maria, but Nathaniel himself, dressed in a dark suit, his tie slightly loosened as if he'd just come from a meeting. "I'm sorry I haven't been around," he said without preamble. "I had to travel to Boston for business. May I come in?" Clara stepped back, suddenly aware of how informal she looked in jeans and a simple sweater, her hair loose around her shoulders. "Of course. It's your house." "It's your room," Nathaniel corrected gently, stepping inside. He glanced around, noting the untouched breakfast tray, the book she'd been reading, the way she had carefully made the bed as if she were still staff. "How are you settling in?" "I don't know how to answer that," Clara said honestly. "I feel like I'm living in someone else's life." Nathaniel nodded as if he'd expected this. "Would you have dinner with me tonight? Just the 2 of us. I think it's time we actually talked." Clara's stomach fluttered with nervousness. "Okay. 7 o'clock? I'll have dinner brought to the library. It's more comfortable than the formal dining room." That evening, Clara stood in front of the wardrobe for 20 minutes, paralyzed by choice. She had never owned more than 3 outfits at a time in her entire life, and now she had dozens of options, all of them far nicer than anything she'd ever worn. Finally, she chose a simple navy dress that felt understated enough not to draw attention. She found her way to the library with Maria's help. It was a massive room, 2 stories tall, with floor-to-ceiling bookshelves and a stone fireplace where a fire crackled softly. Nathaniel was already there, standing by the fire, now dressed in casual clothes, jeans, and a gray sweater that made him look younger, more approachable. "You found it," he said, smiling slightly. "I wasn't sure if you'd need a map." "I almost did," Clara admitted, returning his smile nervously. A table had been set up near the fireplace with 2 chairs, simple place settings, and covered dishes that smelled incredible. Nathaniel pulled out a chair for her and Clara sat, feeling awkward and out of place. "I asked the kitchen to keep it simple," Nathaniel said, uncovering the dishes. Roasted chicken, vegetables, nothing too formal. I thought you might be more comfortable with something normal. Clara looked at the food, at the care that had gone into its presentation, and felt her throat tighten. You didn't have to do all this. I wanted to, Nathaniel said, sitting across from her. Clara, I know this whole situation is strange. I know I've essentially turned your life upside down, but I meant what I said. I want to get to know you, and I want you to get to know me. They ate in silence for a few minutes, the only sound the crackling of the fire. Clara was hyper-aware of every movement she made, every time her fork clinked against her plate, convinced she was doing something wrong. Tell me about David and Tommy, Nathaniel said finally. Have you heard from them? Clara's face brightened. David called me yesterday. He started his new job. He said Tommy enrolled in school and made a friend on his first day. He kept thanking me, saying he couldn't believe any of this was real. I'm glad, Nathaniel said. My property manager says David's already proven himself invaluable. He fixed a heating system in one of the buildings that 3 other contractors couldn't figure out. He's a good man, Clara said softly. He just needed a chance. Like you, Nathaniel said. Clara looked up, meeting his eyes. I still don't understand why you're giving me this chance. You could have anyone. Why me? Nathaniel set down his fork and leaned back in his chair, studying her. Do you want the honest answer? Please. Because you're the first person I've met in 15 years who didn't want something from me, he said. Do you know how rare that is? In my world, everyone has an agenda. Every conversation is a negotiation. Every relationship is a transaction. People smile at me and I can see them calculating what I'm worth to them. He paused, his jaw tightening slightly. I was engaged once, 3 years ago. Her name was Victoria. She came from the right family, went to the right schools, said all the right things. Everyone told me she was perfect, and maybe she was for the life I was supposed to lead. What happened? Clara asked quietly. I overheard her talking to her mother at a charity event, Nathaniel said, his voice flat. She was laughing about how boring I was, how I worked too much, how she couldn't wait until we were married so she could start redecorating the house and planning trips to Europe with my money. She called me an acceptable sacrifice for the lifestyle. Clara winced. I'm sorry. I broke off the engagement that night, Nathaniel continued, and I promised myself I wouldn't let anyone close again unless they saw me as something other than a bank account. He looked at Clara intently. You didn't even know who I was. When you helped David and Tommy, you weren't thinking about impressing me or gaining favor. You were just being human. That's just basic decency, Clara said. It shouldn't be rare, but it is, Nathaniel replied. At least in the world I live in. They talked for hours that night. Nathaniel told her about growing up as the only child of distant parents, about boarding schools where he learned to bury his emotions, about building his business from the ground up and losing himself in the process. Clara told him about foster homes, about the families who had treated her like a burden, about learning to make herself invisible to avoid conflict. I used to think that if I was quiet enough, small enough, maybe people would forget to hurt me, Clara said, staring into the fire. It worked mostly, but it also meant no one ever really saw me. I became a ghost in my own life. I see you, Nathaniel said softly. Clara looked at him, and for the first time she believed it. Over the following weeks, a routine developed. Nathaniel would work during the day, handling his business operations from his home office. Clara spent her time reading in the library, walking the estate grounds, and slowly learning to accept help from the staff who had once been her colleagues. In the evenings, she and Nathaniel would have dinner together, sometimes in the library, sometimes in the smaller breakfast room, always just the two of them. They talked about everything: books, music, childhood memories, dreams they'd once had. Nathaniel had wanted to be an architect before his father pushed him into business. Clara had dreamed of being a teacher, of helping children who felt as lost as she once had. You still could, Nathaniel said one evening. Become a teacher, I mean. I could help you go back to school. Clara shook her head. I'm 26, it's too late. It's never too late, Nathaniel insisted. And you'd be incredible at it. You have more empathy in your little finger than most people have in their entire body. Clara felt tears prick her eyes. No one had ever believed in her potential before. No one had ever suggested she could be more than she was. But as comfortable as she was becoming with Nathaniel, there were still barriers between them. He was careful never to touch her, never to cross the invisible line that separated them. They were two people learning to orbit each other, not yet ready to collide. One evening in early January, nearly 6 weeks after Clara had moved into the mansion, Nathaniel asked her to accompany him to a charity gala. "I know it's asking a lot," he said, "and I'll understand if you say no, but I'm expected to attend, and I'd rather not go alone. You don't have to stay long, just an hour or two." Clara felt panic rise in her chest. "I can't go to something like that. I wouldn't know what to do, what to say." "You'd just be yourself," Nathaniel said. "That's all I'm asking." The night of the gala, Clara stood in her room, staring at the evening gown that had been delivered that afternoon. It was deep emerald green, simple but elegant, with a fitted bodice and flowing skirt. Maria had helped her with her hair and makeup, and when Clara finally looked at herself in the mirror, she barely recognized the woman staring back. She looked like someone who belonged in Nathaniel's world, but she didn't feel like it. The gala was being held at a hotel in downtown Greenwich, a glittering affair with hundreds of guests in formal wear, champagne flowing freely, and a string quartet playing in the corner. Clara walked in on Nathaniel's arm, her hand trembling slightly where it rested in the crook of his elbow. "Just breathe," Nathaniel whispered. "You look beautiful, and you belong here as much as anyone." But within minutes of arriving, Clara felt the stares. Women in designer gowns and dripping with jewelry looked her up and down with barely concealed disdain. Men glanced at her, then at Nathaniel, their expressions calculating. And everywhere she turned, she heard the whispers. "Who is she? I've never seen her before. Do you think she's a gold digger?" Poor Nathaniel, he's always attracted the wrong type. Clara felt herself shrinking, that old instinct to become invisible rising up like a tide. She wanted to run, to hide, to disappear back into the shadows where she belonged. But then Nathaniel's hand covered hers, warm and steady. "Ignore them," he said quietly. "They don't matter." He led her through the crowd, introducing her simply as Clara, my guest. Some people were polite, others were openly hostile, and then they encountered Victoria. She was stunning, tall and blonde with perfect features and a dress that probably cost more than Clara had earned in her entire life. She approached Nathaniel with a practiced smile, her eyes sweeping over Clara with cold assessment. "Nathaniel," she said, her voice like honey over ice. "How wonderful to see you. And who is your friend?" "Clara Bennett," Nathaniel said evenly. "Clara, this is Victoria Hartwell." "Charmed," Victoria said, though her expression suggested otherwise. She turned back to Nathaniel. "I heard a rumor you'd taken in a stray. How very charitable of you." Clara felt the blood drain from her face. Nathaniel's jaw tightened dangerously. "Careful, Victoria," he said, his voice low and warning. "Oh, come now, I'm just curious," Victoria continued, her smile sharpening. "Where did you two meet? I can't imagine it was at the club or any of our usual social events." "We met at my home," Nathaniel said, "and that's all you need to know." Victoria laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "Your home? Oh my God, she works for you, doesn't she? Or did? This is absolutely precious. Nathaniel Ashford, slumming with the help. Your parents must be rolling in their graves." "That's enough," Nathaniel said, his voice cold as winter. But Victoria wasn't finished. She looked at Clara directly now, her eyes cruel. "Let me give you some advice, dear. Whatever fantasy you're living, it won't last. Men like Nathaniel don't end up with girls like you. He'll get bored, or his board of directors will intervene, or he'll remember what he actually deserves. And then you'll be right back where you started, except now you'll know exactly what you lost." Clara felt as if she'd been slapped. Every insecurity she'd been trying to suppress came rushing back. Victoria was right. This was a fantasy. She didn't belong here. She never would. "Excuse me," Clara whispered, pulling away from Nathaniel. "I need some air." She walked quickly toward the exit, ignoring Nathaniel calling her name. She made it to the lobby before the tears started, hot and shameful on her cheeks. She had been so stupid to think this could work, that someone like her could exist in someone like Nathaniel's world. "Clara, wait." She turned to find Nathaniel striding toward her, his expression fierce. "Don't listen to her. Don't let her poison what we're building." "She's right," Clara said, her voice breaking. "I don't belong here. I don't belong in your world. I'm just a maid who got lucky, and everyone in that room knows it. I don't care what they think," Nathaniel said, grasping her shoulders gently. "I care what you think. I care about who you are, not where you came from." "But it matters," Clara said desperately. "It will always matter. People will always look at me and see someone who doesn't deserve to be here. Then they're fools," Nathaniel said. "Clara, look at me." She did, and the intensity in his eyes nearly broke her. "You are worth 100 of the people in that room," he said. "You are kind and brave and real. You saved 2 lives without thinking twice about the cost to yourself. You made me remember what it means to care about something other than profit margins and stock prices. You made me feel human again." He cupped her face gently, his thumbs brushing away her tears. "I don't care about your past. I don't care what people think. I care about you. Just you." Clara couldn't breathe, couldn't think. All she could do was stare at this man who had somehow seen past all her defenses and decided she was worth fighting for. "Nathaniel," she whispered. "Say you'll stay," he said quietly. "Not because I'm asking, but because you want to. Because you feel what I feel." And Clara realized in that moment that she did feel it. The connection that had been building between them over weeks of dinners and conversations and quiet moments. The way her heart raced when he entered a room. The way his smile made her feel like maybe, just maybe, she deserved to be happy. "I'm scared," she admitted. "So am I," Nathaniel said. "But I think you're worth being scared for." And then, in the lobby of a hotel filled with people who would never understand, Nathaniel Ashford kissed Clara Bennett for the first time. It was gentle and tentative and perfect. And when they finally pulled apart, Clara found herself smiling through her tears. "Let's go home," Nathaniel said softly. And for the first time in her life, Clara understood what that word actually meant. Winter gave way to spring, and the Ashford estate transformed with it. The gardens that had been stark and frozen when Clara first arrived burst into color. Cherry blossoms lined the drive, their pink petals drifting across the lawn like snow. Tulips pushed through the earth in bright clusters of red and yellow. The air lost its bitter edge, warming into something gentle and promising, and Clara transformed with it. She woke each morning no longer disoriented by her surroundings but comforted by them. The blue room had become truly hers, filled with books from the library, photographs she'd taken of the gardens, small things that made the space feel lived in rather than borrowed. She had finally stopped making her bed with hospital corners, stopped arranging everything with the precision of someone expecting inspection. She had started to believe, slowly, that this was real, that she was allowed to stay. After the disastrous gala, Nathaniel had made good on his promise. He stopped accepting invitations to events that would require Clara to face people like Victoria. Instead, they carved out their own world within the estate, a bubble where the outside world's judgment couldn't reach them. They had dinners in the library, walks through the gardens as spring emerged, quiet evenings where Nathaniel worked at his desk while Clara read nearby, simply being in each other's presence. The kiss had changed things between them. Not dramatically, not with the explosive passion of romance novels, but subtly, like a door that had been cracked open was now fully ajar. Nathaniel would reach for her hand as they walked. Clara would rest her head on his shoulder as they watched the sunset from the terrace. Small touches, gentle intimacies, the building blocks of something deeper. Mrs. Cordelia had stopped looking scandalized when she saw them together. Maria actively encouraged the relationship, often leaving them alone in rooms where they'd been meant to have chaperones. Even the other staff members had warmed to Clara, no longer seeing her as an outsider but as someone who belonged. But Clara knew that the outside world hadn't forgotten, and she knew that eventually they would have to face it. The call came on a Tuesday morning in late March. Clara was in the garden, photographing the newly bloomed daffodils with a camera Nathaniel had given her for her birthday. Photography had become her passion over the past few months, a way to capture the beauty she'd spent so many years unable to see. She was adjusting the lens when she heard Nathaniel's voice, sharp and angry, drifting through the open window of his study. "I don't care what the board thinks, Richard. My personal life is my personal life." Clara froze, her stomach dropping. "That's not relevant. No, I won't be bringing anyone else because I'm not interested in anyone else." There was a long pause. Clara knew she should walk away, give him privacy, but her feet wouldn't move. "Then they can vote," Nathaniel said, his voice cold. "But I'm not changing my mind. Clara stays in my life, and if they can't accept that, they can find another CEO." Clara's hands were shaking as she lowered the camera. She forced herself to walk toward the house, each step feeling heavier than the last. She found Nathaniel in his study, standing by the window, his phone still in his hand, his expression thunderous. "I heard," she said quietly from the doorway. Nathaniel turned and his expression immediately softened. "Clara, I didn't mean for you to—" "What did the board say?" she asked, stepping into the room. Nathaniel sighed, running a hand through his hair. "Richard Pemberton, the chairman, called. Apparently there's been talk. About us. About your background. Someone did some digging, found out you were working as staff here before you moved to the guest wing." Clara felt sick. And they have a problem with that. Some of them do, Nathaniel admitted. They think it reflects poorly on the company. They're worried about how it looks to investors, to clients. Richard suggested that I should reconsider the relationship for the sake of the business. Maybe you should, Clara said, her voice barely audible. What? Nathaniel stared at her. Clara, no. Absolutely not. Nathaniel, I don't want to be the reason you lose everything you've built, Clara said, tears stinging her eyes. Your company, your reputation, mean nothing compared to you. Nathaniel interrupted, crossing the room to her. Clara, listen to me. I've spent 15 years building Ashford Industries. I've sacrificed relationships, time, my own happiness, all for a company that I'm beginning to realize was just a way to avoid feeling anything real. He took her hands in his. You made me feel again. You made me remember why any of this matters. And I'm not giving that up because some men in suits think you're not good enough for their image of who I should be. But they're right, Clara said desperately. I'm not from your world. I don't have the education, the connections, the background. You have something better, Nathaniel said fiercely. You have integrity. You have kindness. You have strength that none of those people in their ivory towers could even comprehend. You survived things that would have broken them, and you came out of it with your humanity intact. He cupped her face gently. I love you, Clara. I should have said it weeks ago, but I was afraid of scaring you away. But I can't keep it in anymore. I love you, not despite where you came from, but because every part of your journey made you who you are. And who you are is the most extraordinary person I've ever met. Clara felt tears streaming down her face. I love you too, she whispered. That's why I'm scared. What if loving me costs you everything? Then it would be worth it, Nathaniel said simply. The next few weeks were a storm. Articles appeared in business journals, thinly veiled gossip masquerading as news. Billionaire CEO's controversial romance. Ashford's unconventional choice raises eyebrows. The articles never named Clara directly, but the implications were clear. Nathaniel Ashford was dating someone inappropriate, someone beneath him, someone who could damage his company's image. The board called an emergency meeting. Nathaniel attended, and returned 3 hours later looking exhausted but resolved. They gave me an ultimatum, he told Clara that evening. They were in the library, the fire crackling, rain pattering against the windows. End the relationship, or they'll call for a vote of no confidence. Clara's blood went cold. What does that mean? It means they can remove me as CEO, Nathaniel said. If enough board members vote against me, I lose control of the company I built. Then we have to end this, Clara said immediately. Nathaniel, I can't let you lose everything because of me. It's not because of you, Nathaniel said firmly. It's because of their prejudice, their narrow-minded idea of what success should look like, who I should be with, and I'm not going to let them dictate my life. But the company is just a company, Nathaniel said. Clara, I've been thinking about this a lot. What Richard said, what Victoria said at the gala, what all these articles are implying. They keep talking about what I'm risking, what I'm sacrificing, but none of them ask what I'm gaining. He moved closer to her, taking her hands. Do you know what I was before I met you? I was a machine. I woke up, I worked, I made money, I went to bed. I had no real friends, no meaningful relationships, no purpose beyond accumulating more wealth than I could ever spend. I was successful by every metric that society values, and I was completely empty inside. You changed that, he continued. You showed me what actually matters. Connection, compassion, being brave enough to help someone even when it costs you. That's worth more than any company, any amount of money, any board position. Clara was crying now, unable to hold back the tears. I don't want you to have to choose. I'm not choosing between you and the company, Nathaniel said. I'm choosing between living a life that matters and living a life that looks good on paper. And honestly, that's not even a choice. The vote was scheduled for the following Monday. The weekend before, Clara barely slept. She kept running through scenarios in her head, each one worse than the last. Nathaniel losing his company, his reputation destroyed, all because he had fallen in love with the wrong person. She thought about leaving, about disappearing before the vote could happen, sparing him the consequences of choosing her. But every time she considered it, she remembered his words. I love you. You made me feel human again. And she realized that leaving would hurt him more than any business loss ever could. On Sunday afternoon, Clara received an unexpected visitor. She was in the garden, trying to distract herself with photography, when Maria appeared on the path. Miss Clara, there's someone here to see you, Maria said, her expression curious. A Mr. David Miller and his son. Clara's face lit up. She hadn't seen David and Tommy since they'd moved to Stamford 3 months ago. Though they'd spoken on the phone regularly, she hurried to the front of the house and found them standing by the entrance, both dressed in clean clothes that fit properly, both looking healthier than she'd ever seen them. "David, Tommy!" Clara ran to them, hugging Tommy so tightly he squeaked. "Hi, Miss Clara," Tommy said, grinning up at her. He'd lost a tooth since she'd last seen him, and his cheeks had filled out. He looked like a normal, happy 6-year-old, not the frightened, starving child she'd found shivering outside the gate. "We heard what was happening," David said, his expression serious. "With Mr. Ashford and his company. It's all over the news." Clara's smile faded. "Oh, yes. That's why we're here," David said. "We want to help." "Help how?" Clara asked, confused. David reached into his jacket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. "I wrote something about what you did for us, about how you saved our lives. I want to give it to the newspapers. Let people know the truth about who you are." Clara's eyes widened. "David, no, you don't have to do that. This isn't your fight." "Yes, it is," David said firmly. "Clara, you gave up everything for us. You risked your job, your home, your future, for 2 strangers you'd never met. You didn't do it for publicity or recognition. You did it because it was right. And now people are trying to tear you down, trying to make you seem like you're not good enough, like you're some kind of gold digger. That's garbage, and I won't stand by and let them say it." Tommy tugged on Clara's sleeve. "You're a hero, Miss Clara. My dad says so, and heroes shouldn't be sad." Clara felt tears welling up. "I don't know what to say." "Say you'll let us tell your story," David said. "The real story, not the garbage they're printing in those business magazines." Before Clara could respond, Nathaniel appeared in the doorway. He'd clearly been listening. "David's right," he said quietly. "Clara, you've spent your whole life trying to be invisible. Maybe it's time people actually saw you." That evening, David's letter was sent to every major newspaper in Connecticut. It was simple, honest, and powerful. "My name is David Miller. 3 months ago, I was homeless, sleeping on the streets with my 6-year-old son, watching him slowly starve to death while I tried to find work, shelter, anything to keep him alive. Every door we knocked on was closed. Every person we asked for help looked right through us, except one. Clara Bennett found us outside the Ashford estate on a freezing December night. She was working as a maid, earning barely enough to survive herself. But when she saw my son shivering in the cold, she didn't hesitate. She broke the rules, risked her job, and gave us everything she had. Her food, her blankets, her warmth. She slept on a concrete floor so my son could survive the night. She didn't know we'd be discovered. She didn't know it would lead to anything. She just saw 2 human beings in pain and decided they mattered more than her own safety. Now I read articles calling her inappropriate, questioning her motives, suggesting she's not good enough for Nathaniel Ashford's world. But I'm here to tell you the truth. The world isn't good enough for Clara Bennett. She's the reason my son is alive. She's the reason I have a job, a home, and hope for the future. She's the reason I still believe in human goodness. So before you judge her, before you decide she doesn't belong in your world of wealth and status, ask yourself, when was the last time you sacrificed everything for a stranger? When was the last time you put someone else's life before your own comfort? Clara Bennett is a hero, and if you can't see that, you're blind. The letter went viral. Within 24 hours, it had been shared thousands of times on social media. News outlets picked it up. Television morning shows discussed it. People started sharing their own stories of Clara's kindness. Former co-workers from her various jobs over the years, people she'd helped in small ways she'd never mentioned to anyone. A waitress from a diner in Bridgeport wrote about how Clara had once given her entire paycheck to help pay for the woman's mother's medication. A teacher from one of the foster homes Clara had lived in wrote about a 13-year-old Clara who had protected younger children from bullies taking beatings meant for others. A homeless woman Clara had never even mentioned wrote about how Clara had brought her food every week for months, even when Clara was barely surviving herself. The narrative shifted. Suddenly, Clara wasn't an inappropriate choice or a gold digger. She was a hero, a woman who had overcome impossible odds and never lost her humanity, the kind of person who made the world better simply by existing in it. On Monday morning, the day of the board vote, Nathaniel's phone started ringing before dawn. Board members, one after another, calling to say they'd reconsidered, that they'd been wrong, that Clara was exactly the kind of person who should be by Nathaniel's side. By the time the meeting started, Richard Pemberton himself had withdrawn the vote of no confidence. "I was wrong," Richard said, and he actually looked ashamed. "I let prejudice and old-fashioned thinking cloud my judgment. After reading about Clara, about what she's done, who she is, I realize we should be honored that she's part of your life, Nathaniel. Not concerned about it." Nathaniel returned to the estate that afternoon with a smile Clara had never seen before. Pure, unguarded joy. "It's over," he said, sweeping her into his arms. "The vote was canceled. The board is behind us. Clara, it's really over." Clara clung to him, laughing and crying at the same time. "I can't believe it." "Believe it," Nathaniel said, pulling back to look at her. "And believe this." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. Clara's breath caught as he opened it, revealing a simple but stunning diamond ring, the stone catching the afternoon light. "Clara Bennett," Nathaniel said, dropping to one knee right there in the foyer, not caring that half the staff could see them. "I love you. I love your strength, your kindness, your courage. I love the way you see the world, the way you make me want to be better. I love that you saved 2 lives without thinking twice, and in doing so you saved mine too. I don't want to live another day without you," he continued. "I don't want to wake up in a house where you're just a guest. I want to wake up next to you for the rest of my life. I want to build something real with you, something that matters. I want to have a family with you to make this house a home. I want everything, Clara. With you." Tears were streaming down Clara's face. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, yes. 1,000 times yes." Nathaniel slipped the ring onto her finger and stood, kissing her deeply while the staff erupted in applause around them. Maria was openly crying. Even Mrs. Cordelia was dabbing at her eyes with a handkerchief. That evening, they celebrated with David and Tommy, with the staff, with everyone who had supported them through the storm. The library was filled with laughter and joy, with people toasting to new beginnings and happy endings. But as Clara stood by Nathaniel's side, his arm around her waist, her engagement ring catching the firelight, she knew this wasn't an ending at all. It was a beginning. Later that night, after the guests had left and the house had grown quiet, Clara and Nathaniel stood on the terrace overlooking the gardens. Spring had fully arrived, the air sweet with the scent of blossoms, the sky clear and full of stars. "Are you happy?" Nathaniel asked softly. Clara leaned into him, feeling his warmth, his solidity, the steady beat of his heart. She thought about the terrified girl she'd been, sleeping in her car, convinced that safety was just a dream. She thought about the quiet maid who had tried to make herself invisible, believing that invisibility was the only way to survive, and she realized she wasn't that person anymore. "I'm more than happy," she said. "I'm home." Nathaniel kissed the top of her head. "So am I." They stood there together as night deepened around them, 2 people who had found each other in the darkness and decided to build a light together. A light that would shine not just for them, but for everyone who needed to believe that kindness still existed in the world, that love was possible, that miracles could happen to anyone, even a poor maid who had dared to shelter a starving father and son on a freezing winter night. 6 months after the engagement, Clara stood in front of the mirror in what had once been the blue guest room and was now simply her room, hers and Nathaniel's. The summer sun poured through the windows, casting golden light across the hardwood floors. Outside, the estate gardens were in full bloom, a riot of color and life that seemed impossible compared to the frozen landscape she'd first seen when she arrived. She smoothed down the front of her simple white dress, her hands trembling slightly. It wasn't a traditional wedding gown. She'd refused anything too elaborate, too princess-like. Instead, she'd chosen something elegant but understated, with delicate lace sleeves and a flowing skirt that moved like water when she walked. Her dark hair was loose, adorned with small white flowers that Maria had helped weave into soft waves. "You look beautiful, Miss Clara," Maria said from behind her, her voice thick with emotion. Like an angel. Clara turned and smiled at the woman who had become more than staff, more than a friend. In the months since the engagement, Maria had become something like the mother Clara had never had, offering advice, comfort, and unconditional support. "I'm terrified," Clara admitted. "Is that normal?" "Completely normal," Maria assured her. "But you don't have to be. That man down there loves you more than life itself. Everyone can see it." There was a soft knock at the door and David Miller poked his head in, dressed in a sharp suit that made him look like a different person from the desperate, broken man Clara had found outside the gates 8 months ago. "Ready?" he asked gently. Clara had asked David to walk her down the aisle. She had no family, no father or uncle or older brother. But David had become family in every way that mattered. He had insisted on being part of the wedding planning, had given speeches at the engagement party that left everyone in tears, had told anyone who would listen that Clara Bennett was the finest person he'd ever known. "I think so," Clara said, taking a deep breath. "Tommy's already out there," David said, grinning. "He's taking his ring-bearer duties very seriously. He's been practicing walking slowly all week." Clara laughed, feeling some of her nervousness ease. Tommy had been overjoyed when she'd asked him to be in the wedding. He'd drawn her pictures, made her cards, and told everyone at his school that his fairy godmother was getting married. The ceremony was being held in the gardens, small and intimate, exactly as Clara and Nathaniel had wanted. No massive guest list, no society reporters, no pressure to perform for people who didn't matter. Just the people they loved, the people who had supported them, the people who knew the truth of their story. As Clara made her way down the grand staircase on David's arm, she could hear the soft sound of a string quartet playing outside. Her heart was hammering so hard she thought everyone must be able to hear it. "Nervous?" David whispered. "Terrified," Clara admitted. "What if I trip? What if I say the wrong thing? What if—" "Clara," David interrupted gently. "Do you love him? More than anything?" Clara said immediately. "Then that's all that matters," David said. "Everything else is just details." They stepped out into the garden and Clara's breath caught. White chairs had been arranged in rows on the lawn, filled with familiar faces. The staff from the estate, all dressed in their finest clothes, smiling and dabbing at their eyes. Several members of Nathaniel's board, including Richard Pemberton, who had become one of their strongest supporters. Former co-workers of Clara's from various jobs over the years, people she'd lost touch with but who had reached out after David's letter went viral. The teacher from her old foster home, the waitress from the diner, the homeless woman she'd helped. And there, at the front, standing under an arch covered in white roses and ivy, was Nathaniel. He was wearing a dark blue suit, his hair slightly tousled by the summer breeze. And when he saw Clara, his entire face transformed. It was like watching the sun rise, that smile, pure and unguarded, and full of so much love that Clara felt tears spring to her eyes. Tommy stood next to him in a tiny suit, holding the ring pillow like it was made of glass. When he saw Clara, he waved enthusiastically, forgetting his solemn duties for a moment, and everyone laughed. The quartet began playing the wedding march, and David squeezed Clara's arm gently. "Ready?" Clara nodded, unable to speak around the lump in her throat. They walked down the aisle together, past all those faces, all those people who had come to witness this moment. Clara's eyes never left Nathaniel's. With each step, she felt something inside her settle, some last piece of fear or doubt finally releasing its hold. This was real. This was happening. This was her life now. When they reached the arch, David carefully placed Clara's hand in Nathaniel's, then stepped back, his own eyes wet with tears. "Thank you," Nathaniel mouthed to him, and David nodded, smiling. The officiant was a kind-faced woman named Pastor Ann, who worked at a local church that Clara had started volunteering at. She smiled warmly at both of them before beginning. "We're gathered here today to witness the union of two remarkable people," Pastor Ann said. "Nathaniel and Clara's story is one that reminds us what love truly means. Not the fairy tale version we see in movies, but real love, the kind that sees someone's pain and chooses to help, the kind that risks everything for what matters, the kind that changes lives." She paused, looking out at the gathered guests. Many of you know the story of how these two met, how Clara, working as a maid and barely surviving herself, found David and Tommy outside these gates on a freezing December night, how she broke every rule to help them, how Nathaniel discovered her act of kindness and saw in Clara something he'd been searching for his entire life, genuine, selfless compassion. But what you might not know, Pastor Ann continued, is what happened after that, how Clara struggled to accept help after years of having to survive alone, how Nathaniel fought his own board of directors to keep Clara in his life, how David's letter changed public opinion, how Tommy drew pictures of Clara with a halo insisting she was an angel. She smiled. Love isn't just the grand gestures. It's the quiet moments, the daily choice to see each other, to support each other, to grow together. And that's what Nathaniel and Clara have built, a foundation of mutual respect, genuine affection, and shared values that will carry them through whatever life brings. Pastor Ann turned to Nathaniel. "Nathaniel, do you have vows you'd like to share?" Nathaniel nodded, turning to face Clara fully. He was holding her hands and she could feel them trembling slightly. It made her love him even more, knowing he was as nervous as she was. "Clara," he began, his voice steady despite the emotion in his eyes. 8 months ago, I was living a life that looked perfect on paper but felt empty inside. I had everything society says should make a person happy: wealth, success, status. But I'd forgotten how to feel. I'd forgotten what it meant to connect with another human being in any real way. He squeezed her hands gently. And then I saw you leading 2 strangers across my property in the middle of the night. I saw you risk everything you had for people you didn't know, and I felt something break open inside my chest. Something I thought I'd buried so deep I'd never find it again. You taught me how to be human again, Nathaniel continued. You showed me that wealth means nothing if you don't use it to help others. That success is empty if you can't share it with someone who sees beyond the surface. You made me believe in goodness again, in kindness, in love. His voice cracked slightly. I promise to spend the rest of my life honoring the gift you've given me. I promise to see you, really see you, every single day. I promise to build a life with you that matters, that helps others, that makes the world a little bit better. I promise to love you through every challenge, every joy, every ordinary moment in between. And I promise, he said, a tear sliding down his cheek, that you will never ever be invisible again. Not to me, not to anyone. I will make sure the world sees what I see, the strongest, kindest, most extraordinary person I've ever known. Clara was crying openly now, not even trying to hide it. Around them, there wasn't a dry eye in the garden. Even Mrs. Cordelia was sobbing into a handkerchief. Pastor Ann turned to Clara. Clara, your vows. Clara took a shaky breath, trying to steady her voice. I didn't write anything down, she admitted. I tried, but every time I started it felt wrong. Because how do you put into words what someone means when they've changed your entire life? She looked up at Nathaniel, into those eyes that had first seen her when she thought she was invisible. I spent 26 years believing I didn't matter, that I was someone to be tolerated at best, ignored at worst. I learned to make myself small, quiet, forgettable. I learned that asking for help was dangerous, that trusting people would only lead to pain. And then I met you, Clara continued, and you saw me. Not what I could do for you, not what I represented, just me. You saw all the broken pieces I'd been trying to hide, and instead of turning away, you helped me put them back together. She smiled through her tears. You made me believe I deserved to be happy. You made me believe I could have a home, a family, a future. You fought for me when everyone said I wasn't good enough. You chose me over your company, your reputation, everything you'd built. I promised to spend the rest of my life showing you that you made the right choice, Clara said. I promised to love you with everything I am. I promised to keep you grounded when success gets overwhelming. I promised to remind you what matters when the world tries to pull you away from it. I promised to be your partner, your friend, your home. And I promise, she whispered, to never let you forget what it means to be human. Because you saved me, Nathaniel. In every way a person can be saved. And I will spend the rest of my life being grateful for that. There was a long moment of silence, broken only by the sound of people crying softly. Even Nathaniel was openly weeping now, not bothering to hide it. Pastor Ann smiled, her own eyes bright with tears. By the power vested in me, and in the presence of these witnesses, I now pronounce you husband and wife. Nathaniel, you may kiss your bride. Nathaniel didn't wait. He pulled Clara to him and kissed her deeply, passionately, a kiss that spoke of promises kept and futures beginning. The garden erupted in applause and cheers. Tommy jumped up and down, shaking the ring pillow victoriously. David was sobbing openly, not even trying to hide it. When they finally pulled apart, both breathless and laughing, Nathaniel rested his forehead against Clara's. Hello, Mrs. Ashford, he whispered. Hello, husband, Clara whispered back. And they both laughed, the sound bright and full of joy. The reception was held on the lawn, with long tables laden with food, twinkling lights strung between the trees and music playing softly in the background. It was casual and warm, exactly the kind of celebration Clara had always dreamed of, but never believed she'd have. David gave a toast that had everyone alternating between laughter and tears. I've known Clara for less than a year, he said, raising his glass. But in that time, she's changed my life completely. She gave me and my son a future when we had nothing. She showed us that goodness still exists in this world, and now, watching her marry a man who sees her the way we all do, as the extraordinary person she is, I couldn't be happier. To Clara and Nathaniel, may your love continue to change lives the way it's changed ours. To Clara and Nathaniel, everyone echoed, raising their glasses. Tommy insisted on making his own toast, standing on a chair and shouting, "Miss Clara is the best and Mr. Nathaniel is very lucky," which got the biggest applause of all. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold, Nathaniel led Clara to the dance floor for their first dance. The quartet began playing a slow, sweet melody, and they moved together, swaying gently, lost in their own world. "Happy?" Nathaniel murmured into her hair. "Happier than I ever thought possible," Clara said. "Is this real?" "Sometimes I still can't believe it." "It's real," Nathaniel assured her. "This is your life now. Our life." "Our life," Clara repeated, testing the words. "I like the sound of that." They danced in silence for a moment. Then Nathaniel spoke again. "I have something to tell you. I was going to wait until after the wedding, but I can't keep it in anymore." Clara pulled back to look at him. "What is it?" "I've been working on something," Nathaniel said. "A foundation. The Clara Bennett Foundation for Homeless Families." Clara's eyes widened. "What?" "I wanted to do something that mattered," Nathaniel explained. "Something that would honor what you did for David and Tommy. The foundation will provide temporary housing, job training, and support services for homeless families. We're converting one of my properties into a shelter that actually feels like a home, not an institution. We'll have caseworkers, childcare, educational programs, everything families need to get back on their feet." "Nathaniel," Clara breathed, tears welling up again. That's incredible. You inspired it," Nathaniel said. "You showed me that one person's kindness can change everything. Now imagine what we could do together, with resources behind that kindness. We could help hundreds of families, thousands eventually." Clara couldn't speak. She just held him tighter, overwhelmed by love and gratitude and hope. "There's more," Nathaniel said. "I want you to run it. I know you talked about becoming a teacher, and you still can if you want, but I think you'd be amazing at this. You understand what these families are going through. You know what it means to have nothing and need everything. You could make such a difference." "I would love that," Clara whispered. "More than anything." They continued dancing as the sky darkened and stars began to appear. Around them, their guests laughed and talked and celebrated, creating memories that would last a lifetime. Tommy was chasing fireflies with some of the other children. David was deep in conversation with Richard Pemberton about potential job opportunities for homeless individuals. Maria was directing the staff with the efficiency of a general, making sure everyone had food and drinks. It was perfect. Not magazine perfect, not society event perfect, but real-life perfect, filled with genuine love and joy and connection. Later that night, after the last guest had left and the staff had cleaned up, Nathaniel and Clara stood on the terrace, exactly where they'd stood the night of their engagement. The summer air was warm and sweet, filled with the scent of roses and jasmine. "Do you remember standing here that night?" Nathaniel asked. "When I asked if you were happy, I said I was home," Clara remembered. "And now?" Nathaniel asked. Clara looked out over the gardens, at the estate that had once seemed so foreign and intimidating. She thought about the blue room where she'd first slept, terrified and uncertain. She thought about the storage building where she'd sheltered David and Tommy. She thought about every moment that had led to this one. "Now," she said softly, "I know what home really means. It's not a place. It's not a building or a room or even a piece of land. It's this. It's you. It's the life we're building together. It's knowing that no matter what happens, I'll never have to face it alone again." Nathaniel pulled her close, and they stood together under the stars. Two people who had found each other against all odds and decided to build something beautiful together. 3 years later, the Clara Bennett Foundation had helped 237 families transition from homelessness to stable housing. David Miller had been promoted to the foundation's maintenance director, training other men and women in the trades. Tommy was thriving in school, already talking about becoming an architect so he could design better shelters for people who needed them. Clara and Nathaniel had 2 children of their own, a daughter named Hope and a son named David, both named after the things and people who had changed their lives. They raised their children with the same values that had brought them together: compassion, generosity, and the understanding that every person mattered, regardless of their circumstances. The estate was no longer a cold, perfect mansion, but a real home, filled with laughter and love and the constant traffic of people coming and going. Foundation staff, families in transition, volunteers, friends. The walls that had once felt like barriers now felt like arms, welcoming everyone who needed shelter. And every December, On the anniversary of the night Clara had found David and Tommy outside the gates, they held a fundraiser for the foundation, or it had become the most sought-after invitation in Greenwich, not because it was exclusive, but because it was real. People came not to see and be seen, but to contribute to something that mattered. At the third anniversary fundraiser, Clara stood at the front of the ballroom, her hand in Nathaniel's, looking out at the hundreds of faces gathered to support their cause. She thought about the terrified girl she'd been, sleeping in her car and believing she didn't matter. She thought about the maid who had tried to be invisible. She thought about the woman who had made one choice on one freezing night, never imagining how that choice would change everything. "Thank you all for being here," Clara said, her voice clear and strong. "3 years ago, I made a decision that seemed simple at the time. I saw 2 people suffering and I helped them. I didn't think about the consequences. I didn't think about what I might gain or lose. I just knew that I couldn't walk away." She paused, squeezing Nathaniel's hand. "That one choice led to all of this, to this foundation, to these families we've helped, to the life I never dreamed I could have. And it taught me something important. We all have the power to change someone's life, not through grand gestures or enormous resources, though those certainly help, but through simple acts of kindness, through choosing to see people's pain and respond to it, through believing that every person deserves dignity, support, and hope. So tonight," Clara continued, "I challenge all of you. Look for the people who are invisible, the ones society has trained us to walk past. The homeless man on the corner, the single mother struggling to feed her kids, the veteran who can't find work, the teenager aging out of foster care with nowhere to go. See them, help them, because you never know. That one act of kindness might change everything, for them and for you." The applause was thunderous. People were crying, nodding, already pulling out their phones to make donations. And in the back of the room, David Miller stood with Tommy, both of them smiling with pride at the woman who had saved their lives and then spent the rest of hers saving others. That night, after the fundraiser ended and they returned home, Clara and Nathaniel checked on their sleeping children, then stood together in the hallway, just watching them breathe. "We did good," Nathaniel whispered. "We're doing good," Clara corrected. "We're still just beginning." "I love you, Clara Ashford," Nathaniel said. "I love you too," Clara replied. "Thank you for seeing me. Thank you for teaching me how to see," Nathaniel said. They stood there for a long moment, 2 people who had found each other in the darkness and built a light that now reached far beyond themselves. A light that touched hundreds of lives, that gave hope to the hopeless, that proved that kindness still existed in the world. And it all started with one poor maid who had sheltered a starving father and son on a freezing December night, never expecting anyone to notice her kindness. But someone had noticed, and everything had changed. Not just for her, or for the father and son she'd saved, but for everyone whose lives they touched. Ripples spreading outward, endless and eternal. Proof that one act of compassion could transform the world. Because sometimes, the smallest kindness becomes the miracle someone was waiting for, and sometimes that miracle changes everything. 10 years after that December night, Clara stood at the entrance of the Clara Bennett Foundation's 5th shelter location, watching families move into their new temporary homes. Tommy Miller, now 16, volunteered there every weekend, mentoring younger children who reminded him of the scared 6-year-old he'd once been. "Miss Clara," a small voice said. A girl, maybe 7, tugged on her sleeve. "Is it true you used to be homeless too?" Clara knelt down, meeting the child's eyes. "I was, and I was scared, just like you might be. But I want you to know something important. This is not the end of your story. It's just a chapter, and better chapters are coming." The girl hugged her tightly, and Clara felt tears sting her eyes. She would never get used to this, the weight of knowing she could offer hope to others, because she'd lived through their pain. Nathaniel appeared at her side, their daughter Hope balanced on his hip, little David holding his hand. "Ready to go home?" he asked softly. Clara looked around one more time, at the families finding shelter, at Tommy helping a father carry boxes, at David Miller supervising repairs with his team, at the life they'd all built together from one moment of compassion. "Yes," she whispered, "let's go home," because she finally understood what that word truly meant. If this story touches your heart, don't leave before you. Like the video, comment where you're watching from, and subscribe to the channel for more life-changing stories. Because sometimes, the smallest kindness becomes the miracle someone was waiting for.